One of the playing tropes that dates back to the earliest days of D&D is when the GM suddenly goes quiet and begins to roll dice furiously from behind the screen. Soon enough, the players notice this and they become agitated because they know something is up. Because most of the time when you're playing D&D, it's the players that motivate the GM's actions. The players tell the GM, where they're going or what they're doing. The GM then describes the information or has, NPCs or creatures react to their actions. But the rolling of the dice without any input from the players usually means trouble. Some unforeseen or unknown force is getting closer. And the thing about this, that it's a classic example of the metagame relationship between the players and the GM. The players are always looking at the GM, trying to interpret their behavior to get some information. It's like poker players looking at an opponent for a tell. And experienced GMs realize this. They will sometimes begin rolling dice, in a frenzy. The players all get in a tizzy about this. And then they'll just go on as though nothing had happened. And the players aren't sure, was the GM just messing with us, or is somehow this confrontation was delayed? Is something going to, strike us in a few turns? And you can have fun playing with some of these metagame, tells and relationships, but I would say that ordinarily you really want to try to eliminate them as much as possible because they always disrupt the, immersive aspect of D&D in which your players are interacting with your world in as close an approximation as you can to the way we interact in the real world. So the more you as a GM can play the game with a poker face, the better will be your homebrew D&D campaign. Hello again, folks. KR King here, helping one and all homebrew their own D&D campaign. So today I'm going to talk about how to eliminate some of those metagame tells that give your players information that they would not have gotten with their characters moving through your world. And this can come from physical activities like the rolling of the dice behind the screen that I mentioned in my example, but it can also become, from verbal cues that you give, questions you ask, or reacting to something they're doing. Now, obviously, D&D is different than poker in that the GM is not out to defeat the players. And this is something I talked about in an earlier video. It's a cooperative exercise. We're trying to have fun. We're trying to explore a world. But I think that in order to maximize the fun of playing D&D, the clues that the players use to, move their way through the world should come as much as possible, if not exclusively, from the world that they're interacting with, not from the metagame relationship that is inherent between players and GM. So in terms of a general principle in relation to eliminating metagame tells from your D&D campaign, it is, like so many things in life, a matter of preparation and consistency. You want to identify those areas of play that can lead to the players detecting, metagame information and eliminate them through preparation. And you want to be consistent in terms of running your game such that the players will get used to the parameters that you establish to avoid the metagame information. So think about what is happening in the classic example I used of the GM furiously rolling dice behind the screen. Often it's an unplanned encounter or some change that has occurred, in terms of the player's actions, or they've stumbled into something and now, the NPCs or creatures are going to react. The players might have triggered some kind of silent alarm, something that they are not aware of. There's a little bit of a delay involved. But what you as a GM want to do is make this, encounter or trap or whatever unfold without a delay in terms of the mechanics of the game, rolling dice. So one method is to simply eliminate, random encounters from your game. Use pre-made encounters that you rolled up in advance. Then you plug those in when the players say trigger this roll. Now, obviously, there's some work involved. Not only do you have to prepare this, you got to figure out, make it appropriate for the terrain they're in, the level of the players and whatnot. And I've talked about a number of random encounter generators that I've used. Goblinist is one. There are many others. The thing here is You think of these as terms of, well, I'm going to do this on the fly, I just roll it up. But it can also spur your creativity. If you go through and you look at, say, the Goblinist thing, and let's say you've got, 5 4th level characters in a party. So we have these 7 giant wasps. Well, what are they doing here? Do they have a nest nearby with a lot of other wasps? So they're out on a hunting expedition, looking to fly over, see their prey, buzz down, and, paralyze them, take them back to the hive to be used as, parasitical egg layers. So the question here is, do any of the players hear this buzzing of the wasps before they appear overhead? Use a passive perception checks for this. And if the other players hear this, then roll initiative. Otherwise, the wasps may swoop in for a surprise attack. And again, if you've got something, a trap or a silent alarm that the players have triggered, you want to know in advance a little bit about how, if it's something that alerts NPCs, a group of bandits or something, that something is up, what would they do? How would they respond? So you're not just rolling away. They make their response. Perhaps they just, attack. Perhaps they lay in wait. They begin to pepper the group with arrow fire. They have nets or something. I mean, whatever it is, have it prepared in advance such that you're not sitting there, rolling away and giving away meta game information. And of course, in terms of consistency, with this, if you don't want to use, pre-made random encounters or necessarily deal with the changes, beforehand or whatever, what you can do is create consistency in that you are rolling dice all the time behind the screen. You're constantly looking at stuff, whatever, but nothing happens, right? And this may seem a little hokey. It may seem a little forced, but believe me, I've done this in the past where I'm just always rolling. I'm always looking at stuff, whatever. The players will realize this and, their guard will go down. They won't always see it as a metagame tell. So in a general sense, too, I think a huge source of metagame information can come when the GM does not have a sense at all times of where the players are in relation to one another and the world in general. And by in general, what I mean is a non-combat, non-sequential initiative type setting. Because the thing is, whenever your players are in a group and they're moving through the world or they're interacting with someone or something in that world, you want to have an exact idea of where they are in relation to one another without having to ask them. Because the moment you do ask them, they know something's up. So at the beginning of each run, you want the group to declare, set up their marching order. The players tell you what order they're moving in, how far apart they are, and unless they say otherwise, they are always in that marching order. Always. Because whenever you ask players, now who is standing where in relation to what when player X does this, whether it's, opening a door, or moving down a hallway, or just asking someone on the street for directions, the players will have metagame information that something's up. They're going to alter their behavior before you declare, roll initiative and enter the sequential phase of movement and action. The players are bound by this marching order. And the thing is, once they realize that, 1, you are going to be consistent in enforcing this framework, this formation, and 2, they understand the ramifications of this, they will take the responsibility of changing, the marching formation distances between another when they feel it's necessary. And the thing is, once they've decided on a new marching order, it is in place until they declare otherwise. So let's say a group is moving through a dungeon and they come to a door and a player listens at the door and says, I'm going to open that door. If the other players don't say, hold on there, before you do that, we're all going to move 20 feet back, then they are in their preordained marching formation. So if the door is trapped and there's a huge, poison gas explosion that affects a 10 by 10 area, then the players in the 2 front ranks are going to be affected by that. Because if you stop the action to ask now, where is everyone before they open the door, you're giving them metagame information that isn't contained anywhere in terms of the in-play world that they're in. You're just giving a tell that, hey, the door might be trapped. Whereas in real life or real D&D life, the only way to figure that out is to search for the trap, see if you can detect it, and then open the door. And it's easy to explain this justification to the players. In real life, there is no disembodied voice that asks you, now, where are you standing at sometimes and not at others. In fact, it never does. And since it never does, you're not going to do it either. Now, this can get a little trickier if you're playing online where you have tokens and each player has to move their tokens, individually on a map. Do you have the group break ranks as they're exploring a dungeon, forward one, forward the other? The thing is, nobody would move this way. They take a marching order for its defensive capabilities. So here again, once we've established what their marching order is, and we are in a non-initiative, non-sequential, combat situation, I would assume that they're all moving in that formation. Unless something happens, say 30 feet along that move, they go over a square, there's a trap or something explodes, we move the party to that 30-foot square when that lead character would cross and see what happens. Okay, now what if you're in a non-sequential, non-initiative movement situation where you've been using, the marching order, but the players declare, hey, we're going to break order, they're exploring a room, let's say, and we're going to go in a different direction. And you've described this room as a sort of non-threatening, let's say, a bed chamber, and it doesn't really make sense to enter this room and be constantly constricted by our marching order as we go around the room. And you're not going to say, roll initiative when you go in the room because it's a huge metagame tell that something's up. But in fact, within this room in a square, let's just say again, the trap is going to go off. How do you determine if they're all just wandering around this room where everyone is when the trap goes off without revealing things? And before I'll give my method, I'll also describe another situation that is even more sort of, mundane and harmless. The players are back in town. They're going to go visit their usual tavern. They're meeting someone there who's going to offer them a job. But what they don't know is there's a gang of rogues there who have come to attack that person. Now, you also always want to be consistent here in terms of when you're describing, this empty, harmless bedchamber. You give them a sense of what they see. You make any passive checks, in terms of their intelligence or arcana or history, something that's out of the ordinary, whatever. Then they enter the room, but they're not in any kind of, dangerous initiative situation. Same thing at the tavern. They see the tavern, maybe they see someone, oh, there's that merchant that we did a job for at another table. They see some other people over here they know. But if they don't see anything amiss, they're just in a usual night at the tavern. And again, you can passive check to see if any of the players, recognize these rogues or just think something's amiss. But if they don't, where are they when the rogues attack? So what you want to do then is always have the players declare before the turn, where they are going when they're entering a room or an area, and they're not necessarily in their standard marching order. So it is a non-sequential, non-initiative situation, but unbounded by this marching order. So if they're walking down the street, they're in a marching order. If they're walking down the hallways of a dungeon, they're in their marching order. But if they enter the empty, harmless bedchamber and they wanted to explore different things, no marching order. If they go into their favorite tavern or their, a shop or something that's very mundane, then it's non-marching order. So you have the players declare where they're going. They enter, and you have to make a judgment call if something's going to happen, the trap in the bedchamber example or the rogues attack in the tavern, and decide where the players are based on their declarations. So in the bedchamber example, player 1 says, I'm going over to the bookshelf. Player 2 says, I'm going with her. Player 3 says, you know what, I'm going to go over to the desk and search that. And player 4 says, I'm going to stay in the doorway and look out for any trouble. If the trap is set in the bookshelf and the player doesn't detect this and it goes off, player 1 and 2 are affected, the others are not. So in the case of the tavern attack, player number 1 says, I'm going over to the bar. Player number 2 says, I'm going to our standard table in the back. Player 3 says, I'm going to join her. And player number 4 says, hey, I see that person that we did a job with before, someone else, I'm going to go visit them. If the rogues then are waiting to attack at the back table, players 2 and 3 are right there in the attack, and 1 and 4 are somewhere else in the room when you declare roll initiative. So the key here is to always and consistently ask the players where they're going to end their movement in a non-initiative situation. Do this consistently, even though most of the time nothing unusual is going to happen. The players will realize that you do this all the time. You're not necessarily, telegraphing any metagame information about something bad that's going to happen. You just want to know where everyone is just in case. The thing is to do this casually and regularly. You go to Zodi's Tavern, here's the situational map, here's where everybody is, where are you going to be? You're at the armorer's to buy weapons, here's the map of the armorer's place, where are you going to be? And just try to do this consistently. You don't always even have to use a map. A lot of this is theater of the mind, but you just want them to know when you're going to use the map, when you're going to say, uh-oh, roll initiative, where everybody is without telling them that something's up. So I hope that was helpful to you all. Yeah, if you like what you've seen, I always love more subscribers. I always love to get comments because I always answer them. And of course, my friends, keep playing D&D and tell somebody else about it.